Hi! Today's Sunday. I've got my good friend Craig with me.
Right.
Does your aftermarket ECU powered car eat lambda sensors, O2 sensors? If it does, then we're going to show you a few tricks on how you can make them last a bit longer. This is Craig's 1999 MX-5NB. We turboed it. When did we turbo it?
When lockdown.
During lockdown?
COVID lockdown, yeah.
We turboed it during lockdown. It's since evolved. You started off with the standard engine with a TD04.
Yeah.
Now it's got on a TD05
16G.
Forged rods. Very, very simple upgrades to the engine. But it's like a 300 horsepower capable car. It eats oxygen sensors like there's no tomorrow. What's an oxygen sensor, Nicky boy? Well, I'll tell you. It's a sensor that goes in the exhaust pipe and it reports back to the computer. The computer in this particular car is a Motorsport Electronics ME221 and it runs closed loop fueling. You don't necessarily need an oxygen sensor, but if you do have one, you can run what's called closed loop, as I've just explained. The ECU is basically looking at the signal sent from the AFR controller, the wideband controller, and using a target table, it can adjust the fueling as you drive. I'm making all this up on the spot, so it's a bit of a tongue twister. The reason they fail so often, or the reason that Craig's fail so often, is because of the way that they're manufactured and sort of how the car's wired up. These oxygen sensors have got a heater inside them and a ceramic plate. And now what happens is, on Craig's particular car, is you turn the ignition on and it starts to heat the sensor. And if you've ever plugged one of these bad boys in out of the exhaust pipe, you'll know that they glow red hot as soon as they start to get some power to them. On a cold start, the first couple of cranks fires through a bit of moisture, a bit of condensation, which hits the sensor and causes thermal shock. And that's one of the biggest reasons that these O2 sensors fail. So what we're going to do is we're going to wire the car up so that it doesn't power up the wideband until the engine's already running. I managed to do that in one take, so I'm not going to do it again. Let's show you how it was done. Okay, so we've talked about this on the phone a few times. My car's wired up slightly different to this, but this is a timer relay. And what we were going to do was we were going to use a 30-second timer relay so that when you start the car, the relay starts counting. Then after 30 seconds, it powers up the wideband. That gives the exhaust time to clear all the moisture out of it, and that should make your wideband last a bit longer. However, when Craig got here, we tried it with a battery on the workbench to find out that the relay he'd bought didn't work. Craig's come a long way today, and I don't want to send him home without getting any work done. Second time we've tried this, isn't it? Yeah. He came over last time. We ended up setting his tracking for him just for something to do. Because the relay doesn't work, we thought about it and we thought we've got a plan together. We're going to use the ECU in the car to turn on the wideband sensor after the engine started. Bit of waffle now, so bear with me. There's many ways you can use the ECU to power up the wideband. You could say, wait until the coolant temperature gets to 30 degrees, then we'll use a low side output to switch a relay, and that'll then turn on the wideband controller. The problem with temperature is that it's a bit inconsistent, so that's like kind of out the window. But on this particular car, the alternator is controlled by the computer. So if you plug in your laptop, you can look at the status of the alternator. Is it charging? Is it not? The alternator obviously only charges once you start it, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to tell the ECU to only turn on the wideband controller when it sees the alternator status as charging. Right, we best get cracking. Okay, we've got Craig on the key. Now what we've done in the Motorsport Electronics software is created a general purpose table. And all it's looking for is the status of the alternator going from a 1 to a 0, or should I say a 0 to a 1. 0 being not charging, 1 being charging. And you can see the table there is basically 0 to 100, 0 being nothing, 100 being 1. And we've told it to look at the alternator status. If it is charging, we're going to send a low side output to a pin, which is essentially a switched earth. Craig's on the key. That's the status of the alternator. Well, it's not actually, it's the status of the table. So if you want to start it up, Craig, we'll... You can see that there was a slight delay. You can turn it off now if you want to. There's a slight delay from the engine starting to the alternator charging, and we're using that to our advantage. It gives it just enough time to clear the exhaust, and then that's when we start to heat the sensor. I don't know how long they take to heat up on an Innovate. It's about 30 seconds or
30
something.
seconds, yeah.
After 30 seconds, the sensor's hot enough for the gauge to start working. We're going to carry on with the wiring, and then if it works, if we manage to do it right, we'll be able to see it in operation in a few minutes' time. Right, Craig, can you point at the wideband gauge for me? That's it. Perfect pointing. Let's just draw it out a bit. You can see that that wideband is off now. So if you turn the ignition on, please, kiddo, and you'll notice the wideband is still turned off. Now, hopefully what will happen, Craig will start it. The ECU will start the alternator charging. There's what, a delay of about what, maybe 1.5 seconds, something like that. As soon as the alternator can check the status of the alternator and it sees it charging, it should turn the wideband on. Let's go, our kid. Brilliant. We've just had the instructions out for the turbo. When we first built it and put it in, we weren't quite sure how much boost we were going to get out of it. So we put a 7-pound spring in it. And according to the Arashi website, a 7-pound spring was pink. But we've since found out that we think the spring that was in it was only £5 boost. So we've doubled a few springs up and we reckon we've got £15 of boost on the gate now. And if that's the carry-on, we're going to have to go and take it out with a laptop, turn the boost controller off, see what it makes on the gate, and then we can turn it up a bit. Okay then, so we've been out in Craig's car, we've been logging what's been coming out of the ECU. We've seen that the fueling's about maxed out, but it is a little bit rich up top. Now we've changed the springs, we're getting about 19 psi boost out of it, which is, to be fair, about all I'd really want to go in a set of standard pistons. We've had a brilliant day. We've managed to get the wideband controller wired up to the ECU. That's only going to turn on now when the engine starts. Hopefully your O2 sensors will last a bit longer. All right, I'm going to get back to my normal welded up knackered old cars. We'll see you soon.